Join me as we learn Chumash for today, for Wednesday, the Torah reading of Acharei Mos-Kedoshim combined, and we continue into the inappropriate relationships that we started with yesterday, with the different prohibited relationships that the Torah enumerates, which are considered inappropriate and prohibited. Chapter 18, verse 22. Ve'zachar lisishkav mishkevei isha te'evahi. You must not be with a male the way you are with a woman. This is considered as an abomination. Rashi, verse 22, Ve'ezachar. There's no Rashi on this, and we continue. V'chol behema leisitin l'shchavtecha l'tamava. And you must not be with any animal, thereby becoming spiritually defiled because of it. A woman must not stand in front of an animal to be able to be with the animal. L'riva tevelhu, to be able to fornicate with it, because this is a disgusting way of doing it, of an unnatural way of mingling of humans and animal seed. Rashi, tevelhu. If all the other prohibitions of the inappropriate relationships are disgusting, this one is most disgusting of all, and therefore he uses a terminology of kadesh, of where it must be holy. Erva v'niyuf, this is something which is disgusting and inappropriate, and something which is unnatural, as we mentioned, for the, as we're soon going to see the word tevel. Where does he get for the word tevel? V'api al tevlisam. So to the word tevel comes to mean that my anger was on their disgusting behavior. Davar acher, another explanation of why he uses the word tevel. Tevel u'lashon blila, the ear of tevel means to mix, and that this fact that they're mixing the seed of an animal and the seed zera adam v'zera behema, the seed of an animal and the seed of a person, of a human, is something which is not nice. The Torah then continues in verse 24, Al tetamu b'chol eila, do not become impure with all these, because of all these types of impurities is why I've sent away the nations before you which were inhabiting the land of Israel. Verse 25, Atitma aretz, and the land which they were in became impure. And because of this I brought on the account of these sins. Vataki aretz es yishveh, it vomited its inhabitants out of it. And therefore you must safeguard my rules, and my ordinances. And do not do any of these abominations, of all these that we mentioned. Also, you should not do any of these abominations. The native born, nor the convert who dwells amongst you. Verse 27, because all these abominations that we mentioned, the people of the land did before you, that were before you, and because of that, they made the land disgusting and defiled. And thereby the land will not vomit you out. When you will then make it impure, just as it vomited out the nations that preceded you. Rashi, verse 28, this is an example. Why does it tell us about following the laws and what the previous nations were vomited? Why would the land of Israel vomit out those who sin? So, Mashal ben Melech, this is an example, a parable given to a prince who is very particular, very spoiled in the foods that he ate. Shechilu davar mos, that he ate something which was disgusting, something which he wasn't able to tolerate. Shein oimid b'meyav, that it doesn't stay in his stomach. Elamakiyah, he vomited. Kacha Eretz Yisrael, so too the land of Israel. Eino kayem esevrei aveda, it's not able to tolerate those who transgress the sins and abrogate the laws, and therefore it vomits them out. V'targumai, the Targum translates the word v'saki, v'lisaroike, and it will empty out. They empty out on their own. Verse 29, because whoever does any of these disgusting abominations, and they will then be cut off from the midst of the people, amongst of their people, meaning that they will die prematurely and childless. Rashi, verse 29, This includes male and female the same, those that were involved in any of these types of behaviors. Verse 30, Shmartem is mishmarti, and therefore you must safeguard my charge. So you do not commit any of these abominable practices that were performed before you. They will not become impure this way. I am your God. Rashi, shmartem is mishmarti, lahazer bezdin al kach. It gives the job to bezdin to warn and to safeguard that the people don't behave immorally. What is this telling me? Im titamu, that if you do impurify the place, then I discard you. You're no longer my nation, and I am not your God. What pleasure? Why would I want to be with umatem chayvim kliyah? When a person does such type of behavior, and they are therefore deserving of destruction. Therefore he says, Ani Hashem alekeichem, I am your God, meaning my whole godliness, being your God, depends on you observing and you protecting your holiness that you have. This concludes the first part of Revi, of the fourth Torah reading. We now go into the second Torah reading, which is the Torah reading of Kedoshim. The Torah reading of Kedoshim is one of the Torah readings that has the most commandments in it. This, by thereby being called Kedoshim, that you should be holy and observing the commandments, as we'll soon see as we go into the Rashis. Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe Lemer, as God spoke to Moshe, saying, Daber al kol hadas b'nei Yisrael, speak to the entire Jewish community. V'amart aleim, and you will tell them, Kedoshim to you, you should be holy. Ki kodesh ani Hashem alekeichem, because I am holy, because God, your God, is holy. Rashi. Why is he saying speak to all the Jewish community? Why is it so unique here that he doesn't say just speak to the Jewish people? It teaches us that this Torah reading was said by Hakel. Every 7 years, when all the Jewish people had to gather, men, women, and children, by the Holy Temple, they were told these commandments. Because most of the laws of the Torah are dependent on the following words, and they are fundamental and foundational to the words and the observances of the Torah, and therefore it was said on Hakel that everybody should hear it. Kedoshim to you, you should be holy. Hevi prushim in aroyis, you should separate yourselves from these inappropriate behaviors that you were already warned about. V'min avera, and also of the abrogations. Shebakol mokim shatamoitzi geder atamoitzi kedusha. Anytime you geder erva atamoitzi kedusha. Anytime you will find that the terminology of creating a fence by an inappropriate relationship, you will also find the opposite, which is considered something holy, and because of that, they are warned to be particularly careful about it. For example, you'll find this when it talks about in the next week's Torah reading, when we learn about the prohibitions that a Kohen has in who they're allowed to marry. So it says, Isha Zaina v'chalol, about the woman that they're prohibited from marrying. Ani Hashem ekadishchem, I am God, you're holy. So to v'leichal zari, should not desecrate your children. Ani Hashem ekach, I am God that makes them holy. Kedoshim, you should be holy. Kinisha v'zein chalola. So too, in all the different cases where it says one should be holy, it tells us about the prohibitions of the inappropriate relationships. One of the interesting things that we find over here that the Rebbe points out, that why is it that this Torah reading specifically is fundamental? There are so many other Torah readings that are fundamental and foundational. Why is this one specifically that we say that most of the mitzvahs are dependent on? And if we look over here, Rashi is alluding to a certain practice, and an important note that when we want to educate somebody and tell them about certain behaviors and how they should behave, you can either tell them how terrible and despicable they would be if they don't, or you can stress and accentuate the positive. And over here, the Torah is telling us that if you want somebody to observe the Torah and the commandments, of many of the commandments I mentioned, what does the Torah begin with? It was saying in introduction, you are holy, and therefore you should observe the commandments. A positive reinforcement will help and go further in encouraging one to follow the commandments. Verse 3. Ish imei va'aviv tiro, a man must fear his mother and father, and they must observe the Shabbos. Ani Hashem alekeichem, I am your God. Ish imei va'aviv tiro, kol echad mikem tiru aviv imei. Each one of you, that means man and woman, must observe and fear their father and mother. Zeu pshutei, this is the simple interpretation. Umidrashay, the Medrash explains, why over here does it use the terminology that they should fear? Ein liyele ish, I only know that a man has to fear. How do I know Isha minayin, that a woman also? Because it uses the terminology ish, man. How do I know that this applies to a woman as well? Therefore, Kishoimer Tiro, he says Tira'u, which is a plural. Hareikan Shnayim, that's two, which includes the man and the woman. V'im Kain, so why doesn't the Torah just say it clearly? Why does it use the terminology Ish, man? Because the man always has the availability to fear his father or mother. A woman is married to her husband, and her obligation is first to her husband, and her husband can withhold her, as the Talmud explains in Kedushin, from certain items, and therefore she might not always have that ability. The mother and father, why over here does he say the mother before the father? When it comes to respect, it says the father before the mother. Over here he puts the mother before the father, because God saw it is natural that a son should fear the father before the mother. Therefore, it says the mother before the father. However, when it comes to respect, however, when it comes to respect, it is natural that the child should respect the mother before the father, because the mother is the one that usually appeases him, speaks to him softly, and therefore is not necessarily the discipline enforcer. So therefore the respect comes automatic to the mother, fear comes automatic to the father, and therefore the Torah switches them around. So therefore the person should always have and be weary of it. When you must observe the Shabbos, he puts the observance of Shabbos in the same verse as fearing your father. Leimar, to tell you, even though I commanded you about the fear of your father. But if your father tells you, desecrate the Shabbos, do not listen to him. So too by all the other commandments. Therefore he finishes off, I am your God. You and your father are obligated to listen to me. Therefore you have no obligation to listen to him to desecrate what God said, because your father also has to follow what God said. Now, what does it mean to fear? Is fear means you have to tremble? What is the definition of fear? So Rashi explains. How does one define fear? So it's more awe. You shouldn't sit in this place, in a specific place. Don't speak in front of him. Do not contradict his words. What's considered honor and respect, giving him food and drink, helping him get dressed and putting on his shoes, taking him for a walk, taking him where he needs to go. That's part of respect. Verse 4, do not turn to other gods, towards idols. And do not make worthless gods, molten deities for you. I am your gods. Of them, that means over here he calls them idols. Of them, to make them alilim, you are making them l'shain kel. It comes from the word as a god. It's like it's nothing. Therefore he uses a double terminology. Elilim, you consider them a god, but they are actually not a god. That means first you look at them as another god, but then if you start following them, then you start to make them as your god and consider them as something of importance. Leisasu lechem, don't make for yourselves. Leisasu, don't make these graven molten images. Lachedim, don't make it for others. V'lei lachedim lechem, and don't have others make it for you. From here we see that a person is not allowed to make it for himself, and this is part of the abrogation of a negative commandment, not to make these molten idols at all. If you might say, you say, okay, I can't make it for myself, but others can make it for me. It already says, we already have the second commandment of the 10 commandments, you should not have any other gods. Nobody should make it for you, you shouldn't make it for others, and you should not have them. Verse 5, when you are going to slaughter a peace offering, Lashem, for God, make sure that it must be with the intention that it should be acceptable of being a proper offering. What this means is, as Rashi explains as follows. When a person slaughters it, the actual beginning of the slaughtering must be that it should be for the intent to be brought as a sacrifice. Because if you're going to have on it an intent, meaning that you want to eat it in a time which is inappropriate or a place which is inappropriate, then that is already considered a non-wanted sacrifice, and that God is not interested in that kind of sacrifice. What does the word l'rtzeinchem mean? For example, he uses the French word, which is also English, appeasement. That means you want to appease me, and therefore you will bring this as a sacrifice. This is the simpler interpretation. Our rabbis have explained from here, the word lertzeichem is that if a person has the desire to bring a sacrifice, and when he's interested, that means when he takes the knife or anything that he does, if he does not have the proper intent, it will be forbidden to be brought. It's not as if you can throw a knife into the air and then if it falls in the right place and it slaughters it and it will be fine. You have to have the intent to slaughter it properly when you are slaughtering. Verse 6. It must be eaten on the day you slaughter it, and the next day. Whatever is left over until the third day, but Ishi Sarif has to be burnt. Verse Rashi, when you slaughter it, you have to slaughter it. At the time of slaughtering, you have to have the intent that it will be eaten in its appropriate time, which is that day and the next day. Verse 7, if it would be eaten on the third day, pigulhu, it is considered pigul, which is contemptible. Lo yeratza, it is not something that is accepted or valid. Rashi, what is this talking about over here? Why does the Torah have to tell me again that if it's going to be eaten in the wrong time? Didn't it just tell me in the previous verse that if it would be eaten from the flesh of it, the peace offering in the wrong time? So over here, it doesn't only refer to in the wrong time, in the inappropriate time, but also in the inappropriate place, that it would tell you that as something similar to it, that in both of these cases would be considered an invalid sacrifice. I would think that because since you're comparing the two, therefore he'll be liable for the punishment of premature death because of eating it as well. Therefore the verse tells me, the one that eats it will then carry a sin, meaning mimenu from this, but not from something else, meaning if it was eaten in the wrong time. Meaning eaten in the wrong time is when they have the punishment of dying prematurely. Not any yotza, which excludes a case where it was slaughtered and about thinking eating it in an appropriate place. So the actual prohibition where we talk about, there's two prohibitions here, the prohibition of eating it in an inappropriate place and the prohibition of eating it in an inappropriate time. The one of eating it in an inappropriate time would be liable for the death of premature death, however, not so when it comes to eating it in an inappropriate place. Pigul, what does the word pigul mean? Hamisuaf, disgusting, something which is contemptible. Like he talks about those that ate the pig, when he refers to in Isaiah, that their vessels were contemptible. Verse 8, and those that eat it will carry their sin, because the holiness of God, the sanctity of God, they have desecrated, and therefore they will die prematurely. They'll be cut off their soul from their nation, which means they will die prematurely. Rashi, over here we're talking about what laws are we referring to? Is this law referring to when a person eats after its time, when there was leftover? What is the Torah talking about when there's complete leftover? When we're talking about the punishment of dying prematurely, this is only when it was eaten in the wrong time, not in the wrong place. Because the Torah already alluded to it and made this as an exception. And this verse is talking about complete leftovers, where the person didn't eat it in its appropriate time, and therefore it would be liable for karis, which means this dying prematurely. And in the tractate of Krisus, they have it learned from a verse, which when you have two words in the same verse, you are able to infer from one to another, and that's called Gzeira Shava. Verse 9. Now we're going to go to new laws, with laws pertaining to fallen gleanings in the field and the agricultural obligations that have to be given to the poor people. When you will reap harvest in your land, do not fully reap the corners of your field, and do not gather the one or two gleanings from your harvest. Rashi, Leave a corner at the end of your field. These are the little stalks that fall out while harvesting. Only one or two, but once it gets to three, that's already not considered the gleanings, and that he can collect. Verse 10. And so too, when it comes from your vineyard, you must not glean. And normally you collect the fallen individual grapes from your vineyard. So you have the young grapes and they have the fallen grapes. Some leave them for the poor or the and the convert. I am your God. Don't take the young grapes. And one can tell which ones are considered young grapes. How is that? Generally, when we talk about grape, the grapes grow in clusters. And if the grapes don't have a cluster, meaning they don't have an hanging stem or ancillary roots that they're coming from, shoots that they're coming from, then you can know it's still considered young. However, you have also those that fall off. Those are singular grapes that fall off the vine. That fall off while a person's cutting them. I am your God. I am the one that you can know that if I'm going to punish those that don't follow. So therefore, when a person says from those that go against and abrogate the commandments, the punishment may be that a person is liable for cutting off, meaning he may die from this because do not steal from the poor people, because God is the one who protects the poor and wages their war. And therefore over here, if you see that God shows that he's going to punish, you can definitely be sure that God will give you a reward for giving your charity to the poor people. Verse 11. You must not steal money or property. You should not lie. You should not withhold. You must not falsely deny. You do not lie to one another. Rashi, why over here is he talking about stealing? It's already one of the 10 commandments that tell us about stealing, because this stealing is a different kind of stealing. Over here we're referring to Acharei Mos-Kedoshim of mammon. This is talking about money. It's a financial stealing. The one in the 10 commandments, it's kidnapping. How do we know this? Because we have a rule that we can learn each thing from its actual item. Because when we look at the actual content of what we talk about in the 10 commandments, all the negative commandments there are all referring to things that have capital punishment. Stealing money, financial, is not a capital punishment. So therefore, the one in the 10 commandments we know is similar to what it may be murder. And in that case, it's kidnapping, which is liable of capital punishment. In this case, however, it's only stealing money. Do not deny, because it says previously in verse 5, chapter 5, verse 22, and a person will deny something which was given to him, for example, which is stolen, and he lies, he has to then pay principal plus 20%. We know what the punishment is in the case of a person denying that he owes money or whatever it may be. Where we see that their Torah gives us, because the Torah only tells us about a punishment only if there's a warning beforehand. That means a person doesn't get punished unless the Torah has a negative commandment that it describes clearly what that abrogation is. So over here it tells us what the law is, and then it tells us what if one does this negative commandment, what the punishment may be that comes from it. Do not lie to one another. Because it tells us that if you lie falsely, then you have to pay principal plus 20%. Therefore, we know what's the punishment. Where do we know the warning for it? The warning's right here. Talmud Leimer, you should not steal. What is this telling us? Why does it tell us these 5 commandments of not stealing, not denying, not lying falsely, and not swearing falsely? Because they're all a lead up. If you're going to steal, then you're going to deny that you actually stole. Then because you deny that you stole, you're going to have to make up a lie. If you're going to make up a lie, then you're going to have to swear falsely and take an oath falsely in the bezdin. Verse 12, do not swear falsely in my name. You will then be done, because you will thereby profane and desecrate God's name. Ani Hashem, I am God. Why does it say over here, don't swear in God's name falsely? It already says it in the Ten Commandments, don't say God's name falsely. Because it says by the Ten Commandments. Don't say God's name in vain. I would think this only applies to God's special name of the Shem Havayim. Therefore, how do I know that this includes all the other names of God? Therefore, it says, do not swear falsely in my name. Kol shem she'eshli, any name that I have, one should not make an oath falsely. Verse 13, you must not oppress your fellow. Do not steal from him, you may not rob him. Do not hold back your hired worker's wage. Until the morning. It must not remain with you the entire night until the morning. Rashi, you should not hold back. This is one that holds back from paying a person who he hired to work. What about keeping overnight? This is a terminology using a feminine terminology because it's going on the actual action, not on the person. It's talking about the activity. Ad Baker, why until the morning? Because over here it's talking about two different ones. This is referring to a person who was hired by the day. So therefore, when he leaves work, it's at sunset. So therefore, the Torah gives the owner, the person can collect his wages all night. In another place in the book of Deuteronomy, it says, you have to give you have to pay up in that day. The sun. Is a person who's paid, who works at night, so therefore you have until the morning to pay him. Because you have to pay him once dawn comes. So therefore collecting can be all day afterwards. The Torah gives the owner an entire day, entire time frame. For a person that works by day, the time frame is night. For a person that works by night, the time frame is day, that they have time to get paid from the owner. Verse 14. Do not curse a living or even a deaf person. You must not put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Fear God, I am God. I know from this verse only if a person's deaf. How I know that you shouldn't curse any person? Therefore, later, as we learned in the book of Shemos, a leader amongst you should not curse. Why over here does he use the terminology deaf person? The same way a person who's deaf, that means you can only use it. You only use the terminology of deaf on a live person. You don't say a dead person's deaf. Therefore, it includes any person alive. This is including any person that the law only applies to people that are alive, which is exception. It excludes an individual who is not alive. You're not liable for punishment for cursing somebody who is dead. You shouldn't put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. What does this mean? This does not necessarily mean only a blind person with a stumbling block. Any person who may be blind in this specific item, for example, don't give him don't give him bad advice. Don't say sell this field, buy this donkey, and really you're conniving and you're trying to set him up for some failure. Because you're going to tell him to sell it and then you're going to buy it for cheaper, or then you're going to resell it, or some type of shtick that you're going to do. Therefore, what does God say? You must fear God. Because no person can really know what your intent is. No person knows what's going on in your heart. Did you give him true advice, proper advice? Was this something which was sincere when you told it to him? Whether it was good or bad. And every person can come along and say, you know what, I really truly intended for the person's good. Therefore, God says here, therefore it says, you must fear God. God knows what your true intent was. God knows what you really had in mind for this individual. He knows what you're thinking. Therefore, you'll find by most things in mitzvahs where it talks about that are given over by the intent of the individual. But nobody else can really know what this person's really thinking. The Torah says you will fear God, because this is something which is between you and God, knows what the true intent is. This concludes the fourth Torah reading of Parshas Acharei Mos-Kedoshim.